While all of the American election campaign nonsense was going on, across the pond the Brits held their own election, which resulted in a Labour majority. In order to understand how we got here, we have to go back almost 15 years. I'm going to simplify parts of the timeline here, since the details aren't that important. In the 2010 election, the Conservatives under David Cameron formed a minority government with the Liberal Democratic Party, beginning a period of 14 years of consistent Conservative rule. In 2015, they won a majority, in part due to a promise in their 2015 manifesto that the Conservatives would hold a referendum on whether or not the UK should leave the European Union if they win. The United States doesn't have a federal-level referendum, the way that parliamentary systems do, so I'll briefly explain it. If there's a contentious topic of conversation among the people regarding something the state should be involved in, a government may choose to hold a referendum, where the government asks, "What do you want done?" and the people vote. In this case, the question was, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? Referendums aren't binding. When the Leave vote won, that didn't mean the UK automatically left. Rather, referendums are a way for the government to directly get data on what the people want done. There's no obligation for the government to fulfill the demands of a referendum, but it's considered political suicide to call a referendum and then ignore its result. So, the Conservatives won a majority in 2015, partially due to the promise that they would hold a referendum on the UK's membership in the EU. Now that Brexit is settled history, I should probably go back at some point and do a deep dive into the whole process, because as somebody who had friends in the UK talking about it back then, and as somebody who witnessed the online discourse myself, it was a pretty wild time, and frankly everyone was kind of going nuts over it. For anybody who went through a big political awakening as a result of Gamergate in 2014, the next big event where progressives acted unhinged on the internet was Brexit. There's a reason that Gamergate, Brexit, Trump was what started every fucking article during this period. In any case, the referendum was held in 2016. The people voted to leave. Remainers screamed bloody murder about how bigoted they all were, because of course they did. And David Cameron stepped down as leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister. His party promised a referendum, because that was popular and won them the election. But Cameron himself was a Remainer. He did not think leaving the EU was the right idea. After the Brexiteers won, he famously stated,
"The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer and better off inside the European Union. And I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people have made a very clear decision to take a different path. And as such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. I will do everything I can as Prime Minister to steady the ship over the coming weeks and months. But I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination."
David Cameron was replaced by Theresa May, who was another Remainer. Her work on negotiating Brexit was frankly pretty shit. She called a snap election in 2017, hoping to strengthen her majority for the upcoming talks with the EU, but she actually lost seats, forcing the Conservatives into a minority government. By 2019, 3 of her Brexit deals had been rejected by her own parliament, and she finally stepped down, making way for Boris Johnson, an actual Brexiteer, and the person that most Conservatives believed should have held the job in the first place. Johnson was a popular, if divisive, Prime Minister, who is often likened to Trump, and unlike his predecessors, he delivered on Brexit. He ultimately got the boot over a series of scandals. One where it was determined that he and his pals were regularly violating the strict COVID lockdown measures that had been implemented on the rest of the country, and another where the Deputy Chief Whip, Chris Pincher, had been a serial sexual harasser, and that Johnson had known about it as far back as 2019 and did nothing about it. Joking, Pincher by name, Pincher by nature. These scandals led to mass resignations and Johnson stepping down as leader of the Conservative Party. After Johnson was Liz Truss, who won the 2022 leadership vote against Rishi Sunak. Her political positions are more in line with Boris Johnson's, but she had none of his charisma, none of his grassroots support, and significantly fewer in-party connections. As a result, she became the UK's shortest-serving Prime Minister, lasting only 50 days in office. After stepping down, Rishi Sunak became party leader. There's a commonly held view among on-the-ground Conservatives that the Conservative Party machinery wanted Boris Johnson gone and wanted him replaced by somebody who was, let's say, less nationalistic. Liz Truss was not that person, so even though Rishi Sunak lost to her, she was quickly discredited and cycled out. Sunak ran unopposed for leadership this time, and so he was simply appointed to the position. His only other opponent dropped out 2 minutes before the cutoff point. For his 2 years in office, Rishi Sunak outlined 5 major policies he intended to implement, most of which went unfulfilled. Cutting inflation in half, growing the economy, cutting the national debt, reducing NHS wait times, and stopping the illegal immigrant boat crossing crisis in the English Channel. Conservative popularity continued to fall throughout his tenure, and in the 2024 election, held ironically on July 4th, the Conservatives were finally soundly defeated, with the Labour Party under Keir Starmer winning a crushing majority. The Conservatives lost 251 seats, the worst defeat the party had ever suffered. Keir Starmer isn't a socialist like his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, who was an old-style 20th century Marxist, a leftist populist with Soviet sympathies. To contrast, Starmer is a pragmatic, numbers-oriented neoliberal, roughly cut from the same cloth as Tony Blair. Progressives view Starmer as a traitor for pulling the Labour Party closer to the centre, but other people applaud him for pulling the party out of the radicalising death spiral it had been in under Corbyn. So, to people on the outside, like Americans and Canadians, this looks like a solid rebuke of conservatism on the part of the British public, while Labour moderated towards the centre and found success. But I personally don't think that's the truth. Something else is going on here. If you pay attention to dissident right spaces, it's not hard to discern their take on the whole thing. During Sunak's tenure, as a part of Labour's moderation, people within the Labour Party began to softly promote various anti-woke positions in order to differentiate themselves from the so-called woke conservatives. Now, I know that idea probably sounds a little bit strange, woke conservatives, but that really was what the Tories were in the UK in the end. Conservatives in America are overwhelmingly anti-DEI, for example. But in the UK, the Conservatives were all over that shit in a desperate attempt to not appear bigoted, which didn't work because the leftists called them bigoted anyway. They call them bigoted for simply existing, frankly. The dissident right calls this phenomenon putting woke away. In their view, the left wins in the long run by going 2 steps forward and 1 step back, repeatedly, over multiple generations. Once they've pushed leftward too far and people start to rebel, they back off, but they never go back to where they began. They wait for a few decades for their remaining changes to normalize, and then they march forward again in a new wave of progressivism, until the cycle repeats. As a result, things only ever slowly, but consistently move leftward. And according to the dissident right, the current rollback of, for example, Pride Month stuff isn't a sign that the right is actually winning. It's more like the left has won, and now they will give a few crumbs to the right to calm them down for a while. I'm not entirely sure I buy this explanation, but it certainly does explain some things. As a result of Labour's new win, a few interesting events are now coming down the pipe. They've already scrapped the latest attempt by Conservatives to deport illegal immigrants. They're moving to set into place anti-free speech laws designed to criminalise anti-Islamic speech. And probably most ironically, Jess Phillips. Yes, the butt of the "I wouldn't even rape you" joke from Sargon all those years ago. That Jess Phillips. The hyper-progressive woman who sucked up to the many Muslim members of her constituency out of a commitment to anti-racism got heckled by a crowd of Muslim men for daring to be a woman who holds political power.
Jess Phillips is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for Birmingham Yardley constituency.
Well, a very close thing for Jess Phillips. She's just scraped in. Indeed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So we're going to continue with the class that we had during the campaign. It's all right. The election that I have... I will carry on with my speech. I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Anyway, this election has been... Can you throw them out?
All right, excuse me. Before we have our finished speeches, that's fine.
This election has been the worst election I have ever stood in.
The area she represents has become more solidly Muslim immigrant over time.
British politics has got caustic and nasty and dishonest, and we have to be really careful not to fall for it. And these people shouting and screaming, I didn't meet those people behind the doors. People were upset, people were kind, people were thoughtful.
In that same vein, one of the new independent MPs, who stole a seat from Labour, one of Labour's few losses in fact, is an Islamist candidate who in his victory speech had no problem chanting about dismantling Israel and fighting to the death. He was also elected in one of those areas in the UK that have become majority Muslim immigrant. There's a very long discussion here as to why the spread of radical Islam in the UK is a core and lasting problem, which, like the Brexit retrospective, I'll tackle another time. But the long and short of it is, the UK has taken a truly ridiculous amount of immigration for a nation of its size, and has enforced almost no standard of integration upon that population. As a result, radical Islamists have created ethnic enclaves rife with crime, especially racially motivated crime against the native people of the British Isles. Countries in Europe are not like the countries in North America. Unlike us, they have intact indigenous populations who view their country as their historic ethnic homeland, because it is. They also have a different political tradition and a different relationship with the concept of ethnicity. If it's reasonable for any other ethnic group in the world to desire a state which primarily serves to represent the interests of their nation, then it must also be reasonable for European ethnicities to desire the same thing. Now, maybe you think that's racist, but the truth of it is, people in the UK are fed up with the number of immigrants that are coming in. And calling them racist doesn't address the very real problems they see, not only economically with depressed wages or social services strained to the limit, but also culturally, with ethnic strife happening on the streets in a way that you only used to see in the third world. They're also fed up with the Labour Party, who see no problem with filling the UK up with immigrants until it shatters.
We need to shout so much more and say 20,000 is not enough, 30,000 is not enough. Saturation point, because what does it matter if we have to wait another week for a hospital visit, or if our class sizes are slightly bigger, or if our city is slightly fuller? What does it matter if things are slightly more challenging, if we have to pay a little bit more into the system? Surely it is worth it to see those lives being restored again.
This woman, who's speaking at a pro-immigrant rights rally years ago, well, she actually won a seat in 2024. Now hold on, Dev, you might say. What do you mean people are fed up with the Labour Party? Didn't the Labour Party just enjoy a historic victory? Well, technically yes. But here's where things get weird. If you look at the data regarding the recent UK elections, the Conservatives have enjoyed a slow trend upwards in the percentage of the popular vote that they've captured, until 2024 anyway. Same with the Lib Dems. But in 2024, Labour retained almost the same percentage of the popular vote, approximately 1/3, and yet they more than doubled their seats, sitting at nearly 2/3. Additionally, voter turnout was significantly lower, between 5 and 10% lower than average. This data shows us a few things. One, people are probably more demoralized about the efficacy of democracy than before, as less of them are voting. Two, and more importantly, this is less of a Labour victory and more of a total collapse of the Conservatives. Labour did not get any more votes than last time. Instead, the right-wing vote was split between the Conservatives and the new Reform Party. The Reform Party came out of nowhere, with popular Eurosceptic Nigel Farage at the helm, and promised to finally fulfill what the Conservatives have been paying lip service to for a decade, but have never actually done: patrol the English Channel, turn migrant boats back, and deport illegal immigrants. Regardless of whether or not you agree with these policies, the Conservative Party knew for years that this is what UK's right-wing voters wanted. They kept promising it, they never delivered on it, and eventually, the UK's right-wing voter base turned on them. The numbers show that the Conservatives would probably have kept power if the Reform Party didn't exist. But they do exist, because the Conservative Party in the UK is not in alignment with Conservative voters. Check out this polling data. 5 questions were asked. For some crimes, the death penalty is appropriate. Young people don't respect traditional British values. Censorship of media is necessary to uphold moral standards. People who break the law should be given stiffer sentences. And schools should teach children to obey authority. The graph plots the average of all Labour voters, all Conservative voters, and all voters in total for each question, ranging them from left to right. It also plots the average of all Labour and Conservative Party members, as well as the average of all Labour and Conservative members of Parliament. What this data shows, for 4 of the 5 questions anyway, the odd one out is the censorship of media one, but for the other 4, Conservative members of Parliament are consistently and significantly more left-wing than Conservative voters are, often to the point that Conservative MPs are actually more aligned with Labour voters. Now, if you're lefty, you might think this is based. More left means more good. What the Conservative voters want is evil. So if their elected officials refuse to do it, so much the better. It is a good thing to subvert the Conservative Party. Well, you can hold that belief if you want. But what it naturally leads to, and did lead to in the UK, is right-wing radicalization. If you have center-right policies you want to see implemented, and your only choice of political parties are different flavors of leftist, including one that only pretends to be aligned with you, you are going to become disillusioned with democracy eventually. You are going to vote for far-right parties if possible, and you are going to drift in a more extreme manner. This is at least one of the many reasons as to why so many British people I know have drifted rightward over time. It's because they believed, and not without merit, that right-wing voices just weren't being heard, despite the Conservatives holding power for so long, because at the end of the day, the Conservatives were just crypto-progressives. This is why, despite a Labour majority, the right wing is actually currently quite happy in the UK. The Reform Party came in second place in a lot of these races, utterly destroying the Conservatives. The remaining Conservatives are screaming that Reform ruined everything by handing a majority to Labour, that they should have just fallen in line and allowed the Conservatives to take power. Labour is also currently screaming that people who voted Reform are a threat to democracy, they're fascists, they're evil, etc., etc. We've all heard that before.
But are you concerned that in the undergrowth of this election, there are trends that do make some mainstream politicians concerned, whether or not that's you losing the support in many Muslim communities, or whether it's Nigel Farage scooping up votes with his Reform Party, because he was taking votes from Labour, people who'd voted Labour previously, as well as from the Conservatives, and he says he's coming after you. Are you concerned about some of the trends that we saw in the weeds of the election, if you like?
Of course, we've got an outstanding mandate, but of course we take seriously and we'll analyse those results. I did meet in this election good people who were telling me they were thinking about voting Reform. That doesn't mean Reform are good people. When you were able to tell people, well, look, this is what they believe. They support the economic policies of Liz Truss. They support the foreign policies of Vladimir Putin. People are horrified. But now a party like Reform, now it has members of Parliament, will come under the kind of scrutiny which they maybe always should have come under. And they will find that very difficult. And we will come for them. We will tell people what their agenda would mean for their economic security, for their national security, and we'll relish that argument because we know we're in the right place. And a party like Reform is frankly not.
Do you think they're not good people? You hinted they were not good people.
I think the people who voted Reform are good people, often didn't know the full agenda of Reform. I've got to be frank, backing the Kremlin's position in Ukraine is not in the national interest of the United Kingdom.
Now, who knows what'll happen in 5 years? That's how long Labour is guaranteed with a majority. Starmer might destroy the country, or he might govern it really well. Reform might lose all of its luster and fade away, with Conservatives retaking their old seats and voters. Or maybe the immigration problem in the UK gets even worse, and more people vote Reform next time. But there is a lesson to be learned here. If you lie to your constituents for multiple elections by promising them what they want and then not delivering on it, because in actuality you're not aligned with them at all, you will eventually lose. The people will turn on you. Somebody will come along and actually sincerely promise to do the thing that you've been kicking the can on all this time. Other democracies would do well to learn the lesson of the 2024 UK election. Hey guys, thanks for watching and thanks for sticking with me. If you want more dev action, my girlfriend Naomi and I went to go see a movie a couple nights ago called A Quiet Place Day 1. That's been uploaded on the side channel. So if you want to go watch that, go check it out. I'd really appreciate it if you did. I will see you over there, guys. Have a good one. Have a good one. I love you.